Henry's home. I said that most of the patrons along the dirt pike from Willoughby were old folks, and they were, but Henry wasn't. He looked younger than his 40 years, and his wife Esther had the blush of youth upon her round face. Their 3 children, Brent, Jeff, and Hilda, were barefoot and suntanned in the summertime, rosy-cheeked in the wintertime, and shy, polite, and happy all the time. They had reason to be. Henry was a thoughtful, quiet man who had never felt the panic that had driven his friends to abandon the farm for the glories of Chamberstown and its progress. It wasn't that Henry was opposed to progress as much as it was that he sincerely questioned the value of its fruit. But, well, maybe it'll be better understood if I tell it to you like Henry told it to me. Well, the way he felt about it was this. His father and his grandfather before him had lived well off the 160 acres which Henry now owned by inheritance. He felt the land would be just as good for him. When he married Esther Jenkins from the adjoining farm, she felt as strongly about it as Henry did, and both looked forward to raising their children on Salem Pike as they had been raised. They lived pretty much as their parents had and saw no reason to change much of anything. Oh, they whitewashed the tree trunks in the front yard and replaced the pickets in the yard fence, some of which Henry himself had broken as a growing boy, chasing old Tippy, who was chasing the old white leghorn rooster through the fence. Yes, and they painted the weatherboarding of the large double-porch, 2-story house, and its tin roof shone bright red in the morning sun as though it was shouting to the world that a new family lived here now. Seemed like just a few months ago, instead of years, that Henry and Esther had sat at the kitchen table doodling on a sheet of tablet paper trying to come up with a name for the place. They finally did, and the sign hung proudly on the large pine tree just inside the front gate with its hand-lettered message, Whispering Pines. They had deep roots there. As deep as the old pine Henry's grandfather had planted by the gate the day he brought his bride to Salem Pike in a new house. Life was complete there. And they seldom had call to go anywhere, and when they did, it was usually only as far as Willoughby. The electric line had never come out to Pike, and having never known its convenience, Henry had never felt its loss. The kerosene lamps seemed to be sufficient for all the evening activities, and the Aladdin lamps stood by like sentries awaiting the call to special duty to light every corner of the large living room. Of course, the wicks of the regular lamps had to be trimmed occasionally, and once in a while the chimneys had to be washed and wiped dry with old newspaper. A few candles were kept handy in the buffet drawer for special occasions like Christmas or birthdays, or to light the ugly face of a jack-o'-lantern carved with Henry's Barlow knife. The barn lanterns hung ready on the back porch for emergencies, such as a cow about to be fresh, or a skunk in the chicken house, a mare about to foal, or the excitement of some woods creature challenged at the edge of the yard by Old Brown, a descendant of old Tippy. Nobody knew who Old Brown's daddy was, and nobody cared. Henry's gum boots, along with 3 small pair, stood proudly at attention in their place by the screen door, and his denim jacket and sweat-stained straw hat hung on a wooden peg, carved by his grandfather and worn smooth by 75 years of jackets and sweaty hats. The lack of electricity was no real problem to Henry and Esther, especially in the summer when, after a full day's work in the sun, they welcomed the cool and the darkness of the evening. They never thought of lighting a lamp for the porch, for the light would only have drawn mosquitoes and millers to torment them, and the heat would have been an unwelcome visitor. They loved to sit on the porch in the summer evenings and feel the darkness fall around them like a welcome rain as it tucked all nature to bed. Who can describe the sights and sounds of such an evening? The shimmering quicksilver of a full moon, the spattering of stars across a black sky, the clouds slipping across the face of the moon like a bashful lady covering her face with a fan. In the distance, the plaintive cry of a lonesome whippoorwill, the endless chorus of the tree frogs, or toads, such as the case may be, and a common topic of conversation between Brent and Hilda. Occasionally, as though he were diligently watching the score of this nocturnal symphony, a giant bullfrog would explode in a massive whomp. And somewhere, from the banks of Sycamore Creek behind the house, from his hidden place in one of the many trees that lined its bank, a screech owl would render his weird solo. Now, if he was especially haunting in his cry, Hilda would run to the lap of Esther and snuggle close, complaining that she was chilly, although the boys said she was afraid, like all girls. Henry liked to say that the night was God's tranquilizer. And there was talk, or as they say nowadays, communication. Winter was filled with it, for everything had slowed to a walk, and the evenings were long before the fireplace and rich in special talk, open and intimate discussions on the questions of life and death, right and wrong, moral and immoral. There were always the frivolous interruptions of the children when the talk was serious that betrayed a searching mind and a longing heart. There was light, fun-filled talk that invented new riddles or composed new poems or solved hard puzzles. Then there was that special time when Henry would give in to the pressures of the family to tell one of his now famous stories. Sometimes they were the modified stories of his own life, and they always had a moral, but as often as not they were the product of a fertile imagination that could invent pirates and Indians, wild animals and heroes with equal ease. The children would sit spellbound and open-mouthed, and always Henry became in those stories the bravest, strongest, smartest man in the world. When bedtime came, there was often the gathering at the kitchen table for a cold cup of milk, and then around the lighted lamp a few verses from the Book of Books, more questions and a bedtime prayer. After lingering kisses that reflected a pleasant evening ended too soon, the children followed Esther with her lamp up the open stairs to their beds to settle deep in the straw and feather ticks. Henry and Esther would retire to the porch, if in summer, for a last few moments together. Sort of a time when they said the things that need to be said over and over again, and thought about the things that needed to be thought about often, and there was a closeness between them that was good and right. There wasn't always talk at that time. Sometimes there was just a contented silence, and Henry used to say, "Listen to it. It has a soothing sound of its own." It was broken only by the sounds of nature's night noises, quieting their hearts and minds. And the only sound of man that could be heard was the regular squeak of the swing chain grating on its rusty and worn hook, and the steady rhythm of Esther's hickory rocker.